How are you doing, green industry business leaders? This is episode number 21 of the Green Industry Profits Podcast, where we talk about how green industry companies can grow in a profitable way. In today's episode, we had a conversation with Tito Caceres, owner of Bloom Talent Solutions. We dive into importance of having a strong social media presence, accurate job descriptions, understanding a company's growth goals when hiring new team members, the use of artificial intelligence in your recruiting processes, setting expectations for potential candidates, and much more. And before we dive into this episode, just a quick note that this podcast is brought to you by Cycle CPA, a remote accounting firm that works specifically with green industry businesses. For more information, go to cyclecpa.com. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, so super excited to have you back here, Tito. And I know we ran into each other again at the Equip Expo, and I know you were on a panel there as well. And when we were thinking about recruiting and all within that topic, I thought who better to bring in and share some tips and advice. But for those that don't know, so Tito Caceres, he's with Bloom Partners Talent Solutions, and he specializes within the green industry. So this is really his focus, and but yeah, and looking forward to kind of diving in here. But thanks a lot for joining us, Tito.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, good to see you again. No, we met at the Equip Expo, so good to be here with you.
Absolutely. And so I know this time of year, as we're kind of entering into the winter, a lot of companies are just thinking about next year, right? And planning it out. And a big part of that is what is it going to look like for maybe capacity planning and adding on new team members. But from the recruiting perspective and kind of from what you're seeing in the industry, how do companies approach that in regard to even just knowing, okay, who is my next hire or who should be that person that we add onto the team?
Really loaded question, but really, really important, Joe. And the kind of crazy thing that I have been surprised with is, you know, oftentimes I thought, the larger the company, the more kind of spelled out the positions are going to be and what their needs are going to be. And surprisingly, I think this is something that everyone is fraught with. Sometimes figuring out what the next hire should be. And I think it starts with conversations with, obviously, from a financial perspective, right? Of what your budget's looking like, right? What your growth goals are. And here's one that I often find in having conversations with business leaders, which is, what do you want to be identified as, and where are you in your business right now? Are you growth mode? Are you keeping what we have and maybe some attrition because we're shifting gears? So give you an example, right? Like if we're going, we have a residential division and a commercial division, and we want to get rid of the residential division, and now we're going to focus on commercial, or more focus on commercial. So I think it starts with identifying, where you are in your business and figuring out what trajectory you have. For the most part, work with the clients that we're working with, in terms of adding new talent. Um, I think for the most part, they're looking for growth, right? So they're looking for, how do we add someone on? But look, I'm going to speak to that effect, right? Because that's kind of the space that we're typically in. Look, going back to identifying, I think it's a clearly identifying what specific things you want out of your, like, so if you're a commercial division, if you're growing, right? If it's a growth role, if it's a sales position, figuring out, here's just a little bit more detail. If you're going to hire a salesperson, what quotas do you want to have? What historical data do you have to understand typically how you guys, what percentage are you guys growing every year? And I say that because when you're going out, let's just use a sales position, for example. If you're going to hire a salesperson, and that's one of a really common one, most companies are looking for growth, and that's what they're going to usually try to hire for. But look, depending on the market you're in is really important. If you're in a metropolitan area, you're competing against up against other companies that are probably have higher quotas. If you're in a smaller, more rural area, you're a smaller company, your goals have to match your operational capacity, right? And I think that's a huge opportunity. And I say that because, if you're looking at a larger company, their sales quota, I'm just throw a broad number out there that's pretty common. Their sales quota might be $1 million, but they have they have the resources to support $1 million of new growth every year, right? But if you can't sustain that, well, you might be able to sustain the growth of 200, $300,000 a year. So you should just, kind of think about if you're going to bring on a salesperson with those realistic goals where you can fulfill the growth or that kind of operational capacity. So that's how I would articulate it. If you're looking at to add on a position, really understand who you are, right? What type of growth can you actually sustain if you need more operational support, right? So, and I would always break it down that way. Are we in growth mode? Or do we need more fulfillment to take us, to take care of what we currently have? And then from there, figure out who you are, like who you are as a company, right? The beautiful thing I always say this in terms of this industry specifically is very fragmented. Every company does it a little bit different. We're all somewhat doing the same thing, but everyone does it a little bit differently, right? So I think this is an industry more than most where you really have to figure out your own identity and play to that strength. Sell that to the marketplace as well. Articulate that. Don't assume that because there's another landscape company right next door to you that their people are doing the same exact thing as your company is, or that your company is structured like theirs. Because you know this, Joe, 9 times out of 10, very unlikely.
Yeah. No, I think, yeah, because like putting out a job description on Indeed is the easy part. It's do you have the resources and the structure and everything, or as much of it set up as possible. And maybe it's not necessarily relying on maybe that one hire to set up that all of that for you, right? Or do you think, or I guess what
Mm.
responsibility would you put on, maybe someone that's hiring their first salesperson? Uh, what, how much of a responsibility does that salesperson have in your opinion in setting things up versus maybe should the owner have that foundation set?
Great question, right? I think the smaller you are, the you probably hope that someone can come in and do more and cover more ground.
Yeah,
And guess what? That's totally okay. Where
yeah,
I think I see a big mistake is people don't articulate that. You're coming
yeah,
in just to be a salesperson, right? And that's it. And so someone comes in and it's just like, I'm just a salesperson.
yeah,
Where you should probably tell them and articulate that in a job description, or maybe the conversation should revolve around these are your actual responsibilities. And
yeah,
I'll tell you from our perspective, one of the things working with all of our clients and look, our clients hire us to find top talent in the industry, right? So, we have a lot of very detailed conversations and even, in terms of the future outlook of what that opportunity could mean to that prospective candidate,
sure,
they want to know everything that they have to handle because they're probably upset because they were sold a bag of goods, which is why now I want to see something else. Where like that's one of the biggest is one of the reasons we have a high retention rate with the people that we find for our clients is because we try to talk about the surprises. We try to minimize the surprises. We try to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Look,
yeah,
you're gonna have all of these roles, and here's one of the things I like. Heard this on a Simon Sinek podcast, I think a couple years ago, and he was talking about like the philosophy that Amazon uses, right? Which is Amazon is probably one of the hardest places to work. They expect people to work 50, 60-hour weeks, but they tell people that that's what they're walking into, which is why they have a high retention rate. So
yeah,
I say that because for irrespective of the size of your company, irrespective of what you do as a company, talking to the candidates about what they're walking into and the types of responsibilities that they'll actually have is super critical. And there's different flavors, right? There are people that are okay with that. Hey, I think I'm a great salesperson, but I love managing accounts. I think I could do that really well. By the way, I also have experience managing field operations, so I can help you out in the field. Or hey, the yard needs to be picked up, and I can kind of work with that as well. And I could do a lot of things. I could be your jack of all trades, if you will, and your
yeah,
company may need that, and there's people that actually can do that as
yeah,
long as you talk about it and share that as well. When you don't is when you're probably setting yourself up to be kind of like everyone else, which is
yeah,
hoping someone can walk in and maybe they'll handle it just because, hey, I need you to do this.
Yeah, absolutely, Tito. And and I think as companies mature over time, almost like when companies first start off and they try to sell themselves to every customer and get all the business out there, whether it's profitable or not for them, maybe it's not even the right client. I think it's okay for people to be somewhat honest in regard to what the position looks like, right? Being upfront with them, say, listen, this department, you're actually the first salesperson. We don't even have half the processes set up. That's really why we're bringing you in to help us with that. Are you open to learning about some of that, or helping to build a department with us? So, um, I think I totally agree with you, Tito. It's about being honest and straightforward, and you know and I would definitely imagine that, yeah, you're probably placing a lot of people that are frustrated because it was probably the opposite, where they were sold something that ultimately didn't really come true. So
And
that's a great point.
and look, there's different companies. I always like to kind of compare. There's two, I guess, philosophies, irrespective of how large a company is, whether it's a corporate conglomerate or if it's a, family-owned business. Um, some companies need people that are hyper focused on one thing because they have the resources to do that, and some people thrive in that, and that's okay, right? So they need that kind of hyper focused person to do that kind of thing. And guess
Right.
what? There's other people that thrive in the other environment. They want to be in a family owned, highly
Yeah.
empowered environment where they have an ability to also grow, right? And take on more responsibilities as opposed to being in an
Yeah.
environment where I'm like kind of limited because I've got someone above me, someone beside me, and someone below me, and I'm just kind of focused on this one small thing. And
Yeah.
now my ability to grow is a little bit limited or tempered. Again, as long as there's so much power in niche, right? There's so much power in being specialized, and I would say for companies using that philosophy can be super advantageous because if you communicate the opportunities that come because you're wearing more hats and opportunities, you might not cast a broad net, but you'll get the couple of people that will work perfectly in that environment, and you'd be surprised there are more of those than people think.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. And because and there's trade-offs and positives and negatives to each. And that kind of brings me to another question that I have is, even if you aren't one of those companies that has all that structure built out, right? And where someone can kind of walk into a sales role and it's truly maybe just a sales role and all the processes are set up. Maybe you're a smaller company, right? It's your first or second person that you're looking to hire from a managerial or sales perspective. How can a company like that even compete with
Mm.
some of these companies that have these processes and these systems, and also maybe even higher compensation, right? For some of these roles.
Yeah. Again, there's different flavors for everyone.
Yeah,
And I've seen amazing professionals just get burned out by some of these corporate environments.
yeah,
Wasn't for them. And they prefer to go work for a smaller company. So there's that. Or a company that doesn't have all those systems because now I can bring that experience and understanding to your company. And now we're growing all of a sudden.
yeah,
Um, I think there's a misconception and that I can't compete against the bigger companies
yeah,
because they have the market share, they have the reputation, they have all of these things that more or less you just seemingly daunting. I can't attract that kind of talent. But I've seen amazing smaller family-owned companies attract some of the best people that are out there that have worked with those types of companies. How? Well, they're providing a career path. They're very specific to what people are walking into, right? They're doing a great job in terms of marketing. And I know marketing is one of those things that there's a lot of ambiguity behind it, but it's so critical, especially at the foundational stages of a company. Even if you're trying to, kind of tread in terms of or being kind of in a position where you're not in hyper growth mode. Maybe you don't have the resources. Maybe you just don't want to. That's totally okay. And I work with
yeah,
companies of all sizes, and some of them that are like that. But what I do know about those companies specifically is that they're very focused on their marketing approach. They're very understanding of, what are some of the things that they can leverage. So a lot of them are winning awards. A lot of them are winning are super focused on high customer service, right? Retaining their current clients. Even showing a path that, hey, and this is a big one, right? This is what we use for these smaller companies. Look, it's much easier to grow in this smaller environment than being next in line for years at this corporate environment, right? So there's a different taste for both, but I do think that you should never be discouraged. If you're a smaller company, never be discouraged by the bigger companies. There is someone in that organization that would love to be helping you grow your company as well, for sure. And I see that every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think sometimes it could be intimidating, or it could be something that, but yeah, it's definitely have a lot to offer, people, especially if you have that culture and a lot of those things set up, which is
Yep.
awesome. Um, Now, when it comes to some more of the technical aspects of uh, hiring and even looking at the job description,
Mhm.
any advice when it comes to, because I know there's a lot of people out there that, like I said, they're in that planning phase, and they're almost starting a position where it's like, okay, where do I even start with this job description? I guess what are some, what's some advice you have with that?
Yeah, look, I'm gonna give, there's a quick tip, and if you're not using it already, you should start using it, especially if I don't care what size company you are, artificial intelligence is here. And there are so many, resources now where you can teach this technology um, to spit out things that you need, like job descriptions. Tell it the size of companies, the employees that you have, the structure of your company, the services that you render, all the things to really, to streamline you creating these super hyper focused job descriptions that can articulate what you're looking for, right? And again, keeping in mind, right? Depends on what you're trying to do. If you're in growth mode, hey, we need growth minded people, right? If you're in, hey, we need someone that's super, very, has a really high level of expertise in operations, articulate those things. But I would say in today's day and age, I would absolutely recommend using AI as a great, and there's many of them. Chat GPT's obviously there. Google has one as well. I think Gemini. Just use leverage the technology that's out there, especially for like to create job description, those types of things. And here's one too that I would, it was outside of the technology use. Look, I think everyone thinks that, compensation is predicated by what I'm paying someone through a check, right? And I've had this conversation oftentimes, especially with a lot of hiring managers or HR people as of late. And there's an opportunity there where you can articulate other things that are going to be of value, right? So, for example, if it's a manager that you're looking to bring on board and your company provides a company vehicle, well, there's a value to that. If your company offers insurance, talk about that as well. If you're looking for labor, right? And one of the things that labor, especially depending on, obviously, the seasonality in play and depending on where you are around the country, if there's opportunities for someone for labor to do snow where they can make some money as well, spell that out, right?
Yeah.
Think of your average, the average annual, compensation could be too, right? To attract the top talent, I always like to say, zig when others zag. If your competition is just spelling out what someone makes hourly, right? Well, maybe you spell out what someone can make at a year, annually, right? Because if they're an average of working 50 hours a week, 8 months of the year, I mean that's a substantial amount more than what an hourly rate what they could make on just a base hourly rate. So
Yeah.
I would say just try to be creative and articulate what people can make. We like to call it's a sales phrase called on target earnings. Not saying that salespeople, that unless you're hiring salespeople, that's the term used for that. But for others that are hiring people, especially for their operations, think about how to spell out what these people actually make and the value of what they're making. I know these companies are working really hard to attract good people and to keep good people. But it's also, you know, it's not fair to you to not spell out what you're actually paying these people because we know everyone's working hard to take care of their people. It's just good to think about what you can spell out and share with the marketplace.
Yeah, it's interesting how sometimes you can say things in slightly different ways, and maybe even that's something that AI can help with. Giving you listen, what are maybe even if you put the whole job description in in like ChatGPT or something like that, and say,
Yeah,
listen,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
how would you change this if you were a recruiting expert or whatever, right? So I'm sure there's a lot of different things you can do there, but that's awesome. And now, from from your perspective, right? You're working with a lot of companies, and you're very in a lot of the recruiting conversations and seeing really the whole process drawn out, right? When it comes to companies screening people, and maybe even you potentially helping out with that, and whatever that process looks like. What are things that you're seeing the best companies do in regard to being able to successfully take on some of these new team members, maybe versus them going with other opportunities? Whether do you see that like companies reaching out to people quicker or having faster responses or things that they're doing in their onboarding that they're really able to kind of sell that position to that specific candidate?
Yeah. I'm gonna start with what the main thing, which everyone should constantly think about. I don't care what business you're in, your
Yeah,
reputation is extremely important, right? And so that's always a big part of it. So to start foundationally, your reputation is everything, and those that have a better reputation are obviously going to have a little bit of a leg up.
yeah,
um, Outside of that, there are certain things that are going to help you, hire faster, which is candidate experience and elevated candidate experience. What is that like? Well, you said a couple of things, and I talk to our clients all the time, or hiring managers all the time, prospective clients or hiring managers, which is, hey, I can present, we could present amazing candidates, but if you're not efficient in contacting these candidates, someone else will be, right?
yeah,
Timing is super critical, and when you're recruiting people. So I would say some of the companies that do a really good job of hiring and attracting even new talent is their efficiency to hire, right? And something that's also important to know is that when you're recruiting one person, you're also recruiting their sphere. One person has a good experience, they can talk and refer you to that one company. Because guess what? I had a great experience talking to Tito. You should talk to them. It's not for me right now, but my friend is actually looking for a job. Thanks so much
mm,
for respecting my time. Jimmy should probably talk to you, or Karen should probably talk to you, right?
yeah,
So the candidate experience is super, super important. One of the things I would say, some of our clients, some of the better hiring managers, if you will, I'm just going to give them a quick shout out in terms of like how good a job they do is the timeliness to interview. I'm going to say that interviewing is probably one of the biggest make it or break it
yeah,
for hiring people. And why do I say that is because sometimes like if you might have one hiring manager that is not available and another one is right now. So kind of rallying people to interview or their availability to interview is somewhat sporadic. So
yeah,
one of the recommendations I like to make is listen, if you're hiring actively, just block out some time every week that's your interview day or interview
yeah,
time. Pretty simple, but it's super effective because guess what? Everyone that you're going to interview, ultimately, you have that time blocked out for that. So you can constantly have a recruiting, a recruiting process that's kind of just established on your calendar, as opposed to, well, maybe I'm available here, maybe I'm not available here, maybe, and some of the best hiring managers that I've worked with usually have 2 days, two blocks of time during 2 days of the week, where
yeah,
it's just for interviewing. So it's easy, it's much more streamlined. So couple different tidbits there, but I'd say the candidate experience is going to more or less be where a lot of candidates are going to feel more comfortable and refer, either one, taking on a job, and two, potentially referring their friends if they're not interested.
yeah. No, absolutely. And it could be easy to get to maybe not make it a priority in regard to blocking off your calendar, but then that'll often come back to bite you, later on when you're in more of a bind. So I think it's definitely nice to always be recruiting, right? Always prioritize that for sure.
let me, if you don't mind me sharing
Yeah.
one last thing, which is, right now, this is a great time to talk about recruiting because I think there's a little bit of a holding pattern. So candidates right now, some of them are waiting for their bonuses, some of them are waiting for, some potential commissions to close out the year, or some of them are just waiting to not make a change because maybe they have some vacation slated. Um, it's still a great time to be recruiting right now.
Yeah.
People are starting out, they're reflecting on the current year, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about how did it go this year? I don't know if is this for me? Is this a forever home for me? And so now is a great time to be, more or less putting out some feelers, talking to talking to your team. And, one tidbit I like to talk to especially for, your frontline workers, it's a great time to talk to your team right now, your current team. Just tell them, hey, think of a list of your friends or people that you would want to work with,
Yeah.
right? This is a great time to do that, right? Could you make some introductions for us to talk to some of your friends that could be like maybe your coworkers? People love to work with people they like, right?
Yeah.
So great time to leverage people's sphere of influences right now. And I would say this thing too, in terms of a timeliness, right? It's don't wait till March.
Yeah.
Don't wait till spring to start hiring. Start now. Because
Yeah.
even if you can tell to again, kind of going back to the onset of this conversation, which is expectation setting, as long as you set those expectations now that hey, maybe we don't have a position for you now, but we really like you and we'll have this opportunity in a couple of months. That's much more appreciated than hey, I don't even know you and I'm going to reach out to you when everyone's reaching out to you at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, absolutely. I totally agree there. And going back to, like if Tito, you're on the recruiting side of it a lot, right? Let's say if you were in the HR department of a landscape company, how would you structure that initial process, everything from that initial conversation all the way to when you hire someone in regard to like frequency of meetings? Like, would you like, is there typically one screening call and then an interview or
Mm.
two interviews with different people? Maybe if there's an operation, like how would you do that if you were in a landscape company?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, there's a lot of different philosophies and a lot of different schools of thought. My ours is initially I like to always say maybe a phone call first.
Yeah,
Is always ideal, right? I think it takes a little bit away from a little bit of judgment when you're seeing someone. It's just good to kind of just have a conversation. Both ends, both can
yeah,
feel each other out pretty good and having, but one thing I'd say in that regard is hopefully you have something spelled out where you can really go through one, the credentials, and two, the behavioral questions. Never skip over behavioral questions. And look, again, there's a lot of resources, a lot you could find a bunch of behavioral questions specific to a position. So first, a phone call is probably ideal. Second, a Zoom call or in-person call. Oftentimes, I've seen some companies split that second interview by, two hiring managers. So I would say this is a really effective thing to do is maybe having, if you're instead of having multiple times, multiple touch points to
yeah,
streamline it, maybe have multiple people and kind of jam pack an interview so people kind of get a really good understanding from different
yeah,
perspectives. And everyone has a different feel. Everyone has different questions. And I would say at most, if you want to have subsequent interviews, say max 5 interviews, Joe, max. But probably you want to keep it to four by the time someone has an offer. And in between there, a couple of things I always recommend. Every company is different. Some of them like personality assessment. I highly recommend them, even if they're not the one thing that are going to make a deal. They're the deal breaker for that specific person. But at least it gives you an understanding of the personality type coming into your organization and seeing how they work with you and how you work with them. Super
yeah,
important too. And then reference checks. Don't make reference checks specific to, a yes or no to rehire someone. Use the opportunity to ask really good questions about how they work in their environment. What were their wins? The rehire one is a pretty normal question, and I think there's a lot of ambiguity of what a reference check should be. But it's a great opportunity for you to learn about that person, and sometimes people will give you honest responses. And heck, we've had great reference calls where people say, "Hey, look, they weren't good for us, but because they're good for this type of organization." Going back to what we talked about, hey, we're a corporate environment. They will
Yeah,
thrive in a smaller environment. So reference checks to give a lot of insight in that regard. But again, going back to your original question, I would say typically in our experience and in my recommendation, probably keeping it to four, max five interviews is probably ideal to make a hire. And I'd say some of the better ones are doing it within three.
awesome. No, that's fantastic. And Tito, in regard to Bloom Partners Talent Solutions, um, I guess do you mind giving us an overview of what your approach is when you work with companies and just kind of what you do?
Yeah. So look, we would be what you would call like a headhunting agency, right?
Sure.
So we're tapping into the market and hopefully presenting opportunities that are, not necessarily better, but could be something to consider. And we're working with companies nationwide. We're working specifically in the landscape industry, um, different verticals. We're working with companies that are in residential, commercial, installation, and maintenance, and a little bit of other companies in between. We work with irrigation specific companies, parkscape specific companies. From one of the things that we're really effective at is understanding our clients' needs. So at the onset of any of our engagements, we like to get an understanding as if we were to become an internal recruiter. Um,
Sure.
we have industry experience, so we understand a lot of the nuances that our clients potentially have. To kind of give you an example, like a design build firm is much different than a bid build firm, right? And they're doing the same thing essentially. One of them is doing on a commercial side of things, one of them is potentially in residential. And heck, there's even some design build firms that are doing on a commercial side. So we have a lot of nuanced experience that kind of helps us be a little bit more targeted. I would say for us, it's a really challenging industry. And why I say that is because a lot of the talent, again, kind of thinking about this industry being a pretty low barrier of entry, um, unfortunately, it's hard for us to tell whether someone can do a job. So we have to have really thorough conversations with their candidates to
Yeah.
really understand if they're going to be a good fit or not. But understanding that also is the reason what makes us effective. And I would say the process is understanding our clients' needs very thoroughly. They engage us. We typically, we have a target of 60 days to fill a position. Most of the positions that we're working to find or to fill are management to executive level positions for any number of companies. We're not bound to one region. We're out of Florida, based out of Miami, but we're working with companies nationwide. And ultimately, I think one of the things that we are most proud of is that most of our clients are repeat clients. And we really passionate about this industry. We're not doing this just to support our clients, but we're also doing this to support the industry.
Yeah.
Recruiting is the make or break for most of the industry. It really is. It's one of the beauties of it. It's a people driven industry, and it's one of the reasons why we want to continue to support it as much as we can from not only our own clients, but also if we can on platforms like yours to help continue to promote other resources and other things that could potentially help a lot of companies throughout.
That's awesome, Tito. Yeah, and we're definitely agree with specifically working within a niche. I think you can provide better value, and I can definitely see how that applies to recruiting as well, and how it could be frustrating maybe working for or I should say if a landscape works for a recruiting company and they're not as familiar with the industry and they're sending candidates that really aren't a good fit and just clearly and based off things that are maybe obvious to that landscape company, but to other industries it's not as much. So being able to eliminate all of that could mean weeks, and when you're needing someone and you need to fill a position, that could be very crucial, time. So, that's great stuff, Tito. And what's the best way people can reach out to you if they have questions?
Yeah, info at bloompartnerstalent.com is one. Our website, getbloomtalent.com. We have an IG, Bloom Recruiters, and probably the easiest way is LinkedIn. Look us up, Bloom Talent Solutions. We're all over there, and we'd love to continue to help anyone we can.
Thank you, Tito. Listen, really appreciate you hopping on here, and hope you have a nice rest of your day, all right?
Thanks, Joe. I'll see you.